Welcome to The World Today. I'm Waqas Majeed Khan. Today we're talking about the developments taking place in Indian-occupied Kashmir. The BJP and PDP governments that were in Kashmir have parted ways, and therefore there has been governor rule imposed in Indian-occupied Kashmir. We'll be talking about that in detail. Our second story is to do with Mullah Fazlullah, one of the most dreaded terrorists for Pakistan, has been eliminated in a US drone strike, and we'll be talking about the after effects of this particular drone strike that has killed the TTP leader. But the TTP leader has been replaced, according to reports, so we'll be talking about that in detail as well. Well, I'd like to introduce my guests in the studio. Joining me for the conversation today, first of all, we have Ikram BHatti with us, and with him we have Raja Qaisar. Thank you, sir, for being here. But we'll continue with our program after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, to begin the conversation, Bhatti Saab, first of all, this latest development in Indian-occupied Kashmir, the BJP and the PDP parting ways, did you see it coming, or do you think it was a surprise sort of a move?
I think it was a surprise move, but then when you look at the situation worsening in Kashmir, and also the close proximity of the Indian elections, and an urge within the Indian government to project their religious militancy within Azad Kashmir, or in fact the Indian held Kashmir, is something which leads on to us to believe that this could be a planned move, because this will allow them to, of course, bring the territory directly under the central control, and of course continue with a very harsh policy. Not that it is not very harsh already, but then of course they'll be able to make sure that there is no leniency which was earlier on possible by the local government that they had of PDP, which they were partners with, and this is going to allow them and facilitate them to, of course, inflict very heavy-handed and absolute ruthless kind of control in the territory, and of course, it is going to give them some additional popularity within the rest of the country. And I think we could, in a way, see it coming, that this probably would be the only way out for the BJP government to tackle the situation in Indian-held Kashmir, and also win some support elsewhere within India.
Right, sir. Well, Qaisar Saab, in your opinion, we've seen that already this alliance was quite unlikely, but it went through and they tried to control the situation in Kashmir, but they failed miserably. Now that the governor rule has been applied, and there are chances that that governor rule is also now going to be turned into president's rule, so that Mr. Modi, the Prime Minister, can directly interfere in the affairs of the Indian-held Kashmir. How do you think that's going to play out? Do you agree with the Bhatti Saab that the Indian population is for this sort of brutal treatment that the Kashmiris are suffering at the hands of the Indian army?
India banked on the idea of a respite for now.
But because previously they also gave a ceasefire for the month of Ramzan, which then once Eid happened, They have reverted back to, in
Yeah.
fact, even within that period, there were a number of violations of that ceasefire as well.
But it would seemingly go counterproductive. What I foresee is, I agree to Bhatti Saab, it was meant to happen. This alliance was unlikely. It was the marriage of inconvenience. But the timing is very surprising because BJP, you know, what I have always been adamant believer of a thing, that BJP and India in its foreign policy has a perpetual habit of creating a hawks whenever they receive some kind of impetus or some kind of drastic pressure from international front. You see, there had a damning, you know, UNHCR report coming out very recently. Then India's army chief categorically admitted that we are, you know, into an invincible war, and this is not a winnable war, or war is not the ultimate solution. Third thing, you see that an outright frustration of the youth that has brewed in the aftermath of the Burhan Wani's martyrdom is going incessant. It's not stoppable. It's not somewhere, you know, it's not taking a break.
And the recent murder of the renowned journalist has further catalyzed the situation.
And if you see, even before that, and then Mehbooba Mufti's government had a very kind of a stone-hearted attire and a response towards these kind of things. For instance, when Khatua controversy and a very horrendous incident of an 8 years old girl rape took place. So, and she was, and it was kind of a very dumb response on her part. Secondly, you know, when a few of the young people who had lifted the guns and they were martyred, and her response was again very shocking, and she said that they were not out there to buy candies or milk. So they were there and they were meant to receive this kind of treatment. So this was to happen, and because BJP in past 4 years had tried to achieve a kind of a policy outlook where it could show to the rest of the Indians and to the rest of the world that they hold a mainstream acceptance throughout all the states. That's why if you see, there are 31 states in which elections take place in India, and almost in 21 states BJP is having either coalition government or the direct rule right now. So they were hankering after making coalition governments just to solidify, just to fortify their presence in the domestic landscape. This is a very irking time for BJP because of the fact that a very damning report is out. Then BJP is failing in galvanizing the situation in the Jammu and Kashmir. At the same time, things they are not rightly working out for BJP because, you know, BJP had suffered a very colossal setback in Karnataka. The way Congress has retaliated and the way Congress has made an entry, and the way Rahul Gandhi, who was seemingly holding a very vapid aura, you know, he has altogether emerged out as a person who is right now being considered as an alternative option in India. This was not the case 3 or 4 years before. He was kind of a poster boy, lacking an image of a statesman who holds a true acumen. But right now he you know, appears to be a very sane voice. Plus, you know, at the same time, the way things are going in the domestic landscape, in the social landscape of India,
the rise of
jingoism, Hindutva, Hindu jingoism, and outright manifestation, violent outright manifestation, cow vigilantism.
Absolutely. One of the things that you mentioned was about the timing of this decision. Bhatti Saab, in your opinions, how is it significant? Because as Qaisar was also mentioning, the publication of the UN Human Rights Report, which is extremely damning when it talks about the Indian occupied situation. In your opinion, sir, how can we take advantage of that report? And do you think that that report has opened the eyes of the wider world, especially the West, towards the atrocities that are continuing in Kashmir on a daily basis, or no?
Certainly. I think, first of all, you must acknowledge the courage of the UNHCR, because they have been able to, of course, criticize Israel on one side on its recent atrocities, and then they have come out with this elaborate description of Indian atrocities and violation of human rights in Kashmir in this report. Though they have mentioned Pakistan also, but that is only in passing actually.
Absolutely,
And the
sir.
focus remains on India and the Indian atrocities in the Indian held Kashmir. I think the UNHCR for a change has been I think quite assertive in its assessment and in its projections, because even the American ambassador to the UN had to criticize it and actually announce eventually their withdrawal from this organization, which is again I think amusing for the rest of the world, that here is a very responsible sole superpower of the world who was part of this very important organization within the UN.
They were the leading voice
Yes.
for human rights protections all over
Absolutely,
the world.
wherever they intervene on behalf of democracy or human rights.
Absolutely, sir.
And here we are where they are wanting to withdraw.
They've already withdrawn, sir, not just wanting to.
Yes.
Now it's over.
And that too on the pretext of as a protest for the organization to criticize Israel for human rights.
Incredible.
I think this is again for the world to watch and take
indeed,
notice.
the world is indeed watching, sir, especially when, first of all, when they walk out of the Human Rights Organization of the United Nations, and then the way they are treating children at their borders. ICE officials are separating children from immigrants as they cross the border into the US, and that is also something which is very damning for what is happening in the United States. All the things that made America great are now being ripped away from the American society. So I don't see what Mr. Trump's America Great program is going to yield. Qaisar, would you like to comment on the situation where these, the UN Human Rights Organization and the US leaving that organization, how is that going to play out in international politics? How is the European Union and other countries going to react?
Yeah, there are three things, Waqas, which we need to focus and analyze primarily. First, we need to, give a high five applause to Ms. Maliha Lodi, who has been doing remarkably well in the United Nations for past a few years. She has put up tremendous efforts bringing on the things onto the international fora, plus demonstrating all these things, and her proactive multilateral diplomacy has finally
it has yielded dividends for Pakistan.
Has yielded dividends for Pakistan, because this had been our very gruesome concern that Pakistan's diplomatic capital is very blessed, and we had never been able to capture and seize the initiative. And many of the times we had the opportunity where we could have clinched onto that opportunity and could have built a very substantive stance, but we eventually failed out just because of our poor diplomacy and just because that we could not capitalize on to the situation. One thing. Secondly, Americans, these liberal ideals, they are in a retreat. The elections of Trump was a moment of silence for all those who held America, who always held America as in high esteem, and that American exceptional mindset, like America being a crusader and America being a beacon to the rest of the world, these ideals are seemingly shattering. Plus, Americans, over earnest agenda or over enthused agenda of promoting these things or these ideals to the rest of the world.
In a way, many of these actions imitate the actions that were taken by Hitler in Germany. They were also separating children from their parents, and that's what we're seeing the Americans doing. So what's the difference here? Where have we sunk?
What we are experiencing under Trump is a very crude phase of or a very dichotomous manifestation of American liberalism. Americans, what they have, they have been like this before, but under Trump, what is a significant change is that they have shunned away that political correctness, and they are demonstrating it what it has been always.
So the gloves are off, in other words.
The gloves are off, and the things they are pretty crystal clear, and that's how the things they had been and they had been working out. But you see, at the same time, this Americans pulling out from UNHCR, it's again an opening up for the rest of the world, and it's a challenge for the European Union, and it's challenge for the rest of the countries of the world to unequivocally at least make it clear to the America and to the organization and to the rest of the world that they stand by this report. Because if Americans, they have just tried to pressurize UNHCR, or they have just tried to pulverize the intensity of the report, because Americans, they really had not only had good relations with Israel, but they have a kind of a very earnest rapprochement with India, and Americans and Indians, they are very jovial and on a very candid terms to one another in past a few years. So this Americans had considered this both of these reports on either Israel and India as a direct assault onto themselves. And the third thing, Indians, they had always established, I always term it as an iron curtain, like once Winston Churchill used this term for the Eastern Europe, that Russia has established an iron curtain with the rest of the world and the Eastern Europe. India has always established this iron curtain with Jammu and Kashmir and the rest of the world, where these things are the atrocities and these horrendous
human rights abuses.
And human rights abuses, and these very dastardly eventualities, they were overlooked and they were not taken up appropriately and adequately in past a few years. For instance, if you see in the past 2-3 years, there had been very disastrous
I would say not
incidents.
last few years, but the last 7 decades, because it's been 70 years since the Kashmiris are
this
suffering.
struggle has taken a new turn after Burhan Wani's martyrdom.
Of course.
If you see, that event of tying a person to a jeep and parading him across the streets, then that rape of an 8 years old girl.
Well, I want to add something to that. During this entire rhetoric, there are some BJP leaders on the local level that are instigating war with Pakistan. They say that they would, they're rather urging Mr. Modi to engage in a limited war with Pakistan. That was the phrase that they used, but obviously that is going to have a very far-reaching effects, because no war between Pakistan and India can ever be limited, and that is something that they should forget about in the first instance. The second thing, we're seeing a revival of cow vigilantism with renewed fervor and force. A poor Muslim man was lynched by some people recently in India for pushing a cow out of his field, and that is the kind of Hindutva hatred and human rights abuses we are witnessing rising in India exponentially, sir. How can we actually bring this to the fore and make the other countries, the Western powers as well, take notice of this, and then also make some actionable, or take some action which results in subduing this Indian violence against Muslims?
You see, the cow vigilantism in India has been there for a while, and of course under the BJP government, because of their religious militancy and religious militant attitude, it has further promoted such like behavior from the Hindu extremists and the religious minded circles within the Indian society. Now, this face of India is not visible to the world, or the world has been deliberately ignoring it. But now that we have a report from the UN body, which of course is visible to the rest of the world, and I'm sure the world is going to take notice, it is an opportunity for Pakistan, especially Pakistani media, Pakistan's diplomatic cadre, to take it up and of course let the world focus on it and see this hidden face of India, which has not been visible to the rest of the world for quite a while. And I think that is going to, if we are able to do it correctly and effectively, it's going to help a lot in the I think in projecting the Kashmir issue and the violation of human rights in rest of the Indian territory as well, because it is not just against Muslims. We can see it against even Christians. We can see it against even
Dalits.
Low caste Hindus.
Yes.
And this extreme intolerance within India, which is not talked about at the world level at all. This is something that needs to be brought out. And there are innumerable incidents of this nature within India where Christians, Dalits and Muslims have been lynched and even maltreated and brutally handled. So if we are able to, in the light of this report, I think if we can focus on such like incidents, such like happenings within India, I think it's going to bring out the true face of India and I think help the Kashmir cause.
Absolutely, sir. It is our duty to bring that or show that face of India to the rest of the world, and we hope that we'll be able to do that. Let's move on to our second topic, sir. Again, when you spoke about opportunities, do you think that we have a new one when finally the dreaded Fazlullah has been taken out by a US drone? Do you think that might also lead towards some sort of a rapprochement between the Americans and the Pakistanis, which we've seen that the trajectory of that bilateral relationship is also nosediving, unfortunately?
Certainly, I think it is a very positive development and a big sigh of relief for the Pakistani people that this dreaded person who was hiding in Afghanistan for quite some time now, and Pakistan has been demanding action against him, whereas both the Americans and the Afghanis were not willing to accept his presence over there. And but when we look back, we find that in the recent past there have been very frequent high-level interactions, dialogues, visits, meetings, and we had this ceasefire also, and then we have been several commitments from both the sides. And I think it is in the light of all this interaction between the two countries that eventually the Americans did decide to engage Fazlullah, because I'm sure it's a precision strike, and which can only happen when they have very accurate intelligence. And you do not acquire accurate intelligence overnight. It is over a period of time, maybe months, if not more, in which a person is detected, located, identified, tracked, and of course his presence is made sure, and only then he is engaged. So while the Americans and the Afghans may be knowing about his presence for a long time, and it's only now that they have taken action against him, it does indicate a very positive development and an attitude, or a response from both the Americans and the Afghans, and which I think must be acknowledged from Pakistan, because it was the Afghan president himself who called and informed that this person had been engaged and eliminated. And of course we expect that it is going to lead to further positive developments. Although the Taliban, while they did agree to a ceasefire only for 3 days for the first time in the last 17 years.
Unfortunately, that has ended.
Did not last long.
Yes, sir.
Whereas the Afghans had extended it, Taliban refused to extend it, and they just finished it off with another attack.
Yes,
and
sir.
of course they were able to kill, I think, around 25 Afghan soldiers. But you see, while we can express our satisfaction on the elimination of Fazlullah, but the fact remains that TTP is still there. He has his
There's
hierarchy,
a replacement already, sir.
and Fazlullah was not the first head. We have had
There was
Baitullah
Baitullah,
Masood,
there was Masoodullah, there was so many others.
so many who came, who became the leaders, who ran the operation for quite a while, for years, and then when they were eliminated, eventually we had Fazlullah, and who has now been eliminated. So there will be somebody else who is going to take over and continue, and the menace of TTP will remain till it is eliminated. So we should not be complacent, and we should continue to, of course,
In fact, we should be even more alert now,
of
because
course, draw the attention of both Afghans
we would
and
expect
Taliban.
retaliation from the TTP after this
Yes.
particular attack. So we need to be even more careful, sir.
And certainly, and we need to ask the Americans and the Afghans both that while you have engaged and eliminated this person, his organization remains, and that needs to be tackled continuously till it is the whole organization is eliminated or liquidated. So it's a good development and a good step forward, and it must be capitalized on, and as a precedence we must move forward, and firstly we must acknowledge this to the Afghans and to the Americans for something which is very positive and contributes positively to peace and of course confidence between the two countries and the region.
Of course, sir. Qaisar, in your opinion, this perception that a very critical chapter in the history of terrorism in Pakistan has ended with the death of this Mr. Mullah Fazlullah. But do you agree with this perception? Do you think that, as Bhatti Sahab has also mentioned, that TTP is still very much there and they have already replaced Fazlullah with a new leader? How is that going to play out for Pakistan in the coming
See,
weeks?
because in psychological warfare, this kind of elimination or this kind of target, it matters a lot. You know, you have given a very strong and a robust message to the rest of the world that the monstrous Fazlullah is no more. This has damning repercussions for the organizational ranks as well, and plus, you know, these kind of things are the morale boosters for your forces, for your you know, security personnel who are out there in the battlefield, in the operational ground, confronting the menace of the terrorism. So these kind of things, you know, they are always very encouraging for them, you know, who are actually dealing with this thing. I consider it as the highlight of Operation Raddul Fasad, perhaps the most significant and the most substantial achievement which we have achieved under this, you know, Raddul Fasad. At the same time, we also need to give a huge amount of credit to Pakistan's you know, MOM efforts, military on military efforts, plus, you know, Pakistan and you know, US, the way they have interacted, the way they have shared the intelligence, because you see, you know, there had been credible reports that Pakistan quite a few times before shared the information about the whereabouts of Mullah Fazlullah, but he was not attacked. And Pakistan had been demanding United States that, you know, he is in Cunard, and you know, we had been identifying his hideout, but Americans were slightly reluctant in targeting him. This time we have successfully convinced them, and the way reports are coming out that it was actually, you know, kind of a collaborative mechanism in which Pakistan shared the information and US agreed on carrying out a drone strike, and the way it was eliminated and the way that footage is shared, you know, it's really kind of, you know, a positive inkling for Pakistan-US relations as well. Plus, you see, you know, till last week I was very pessimistic about the peace initiative in Afghanistan. But the way, you know, these kind of bold and the daring initiative has been taken up by the Afghan President Ashraf Ghani by initiating a ceasefire, and the way Taliban had been roaming in Kabul and in Afghanistan, and the way, you know, this has, you know, given a kind of, you know, a sigh of a hope that may perhaps, you know, they, you know, this kind of goodwill gesture can somehow translate into a mechanism or into kind of, you know, some kind of collaborative interaction, you know, where it could crystallize or precipitate into, you know, some kind of a sustainable peace in the, you know, peace-starved region.
Absolutely.
Yeah. See, you know, Mullah Fazlullah's death definitely is going to be a very, you know,
Significant blow to the TTP.
significant blow to the TTP. But at the same time, you see, we must acknowledge a fact, you know, since we are also habitual of, you know, taking the glass as half empty, that TTP is perhaps at the weakest position ever in the history, since it was framed and formed in 2007. You know, their organizational ranks have been disrupted, their, you know, significant presence, the way, you know, we have tackled on the horizontal orientation of the terrorism. You see, you know, very recently I was going through the report of South Asian Terrorism Portal, and the year 2017 had been the most peaceful year ever since TTP was formed. In last 10 years, this had been the most peaceful year as far as the number of deaths, number of casualties, and the number of suicide attacks are concerned. So it in fact shows a lot of
progress that the
progress
Pakistan
which
military has
which
made
we
in
have
terms
made.
of kinetic operations.
Yeah, kinetic operations. At the same time, perhaps this is that high time where we need to engage into a multilateral dialogue with Afghan government, with the US, and perhaps we need to clear the mist of the misunderstanding which is there.
I think that's a very key point that you have brought up of clearing the mist of misunderstanding. Bhatti Saab, in your opinion, the decision of the Pakistan military and the government to fence the border with Afghanistan, do you think that has also had an effect and played a positive part in controlling cross-border movement of terrorists? And do you think that that is now being acknowledged by the Afghans and the Americans?
Certainly, I think the inability of TTP to continue their activities with the same kind of intensity and momentum in 2017 as we just talked, I think should be attributed to the border management as well. Because while we had this Operation Radd al-Fasad in full swing in our areas, I think the fencing of the border has contributed to it, which has made it much more difficult for the TTP terrorists to cross the border and enter into Pakistan. But they do have some, of course, sleeping cells or their sympathizers, especially around Quetta, which continue to show their presence in the shape of some terrorist activities, and occasionally in Peshawar area as well. So I think while TTP may be at its lowest ebb, but it continues to exist, and I think this is the time that we need to increase our momentum and focus it more, and so that we can eliminate it altogether. And this can only happen if we are able to get the support and confidence of the Afghan government as well as the Americans. And this is the time that we need to probably sit together more and put our cards on the table and of course engage this menace and eliminate it. But while we of course express our satisfaction at elimination of Fazlullah, the fact remains that there is yet another menace that is still looming, and that is IS.
Absolutely, sir.
And that is something which is of a bigger concern, not only to Pakistan but to the entire region.
Absolutely, sir.
And for that, I think a much bigger, much wider and much concerted effort would be required, because that organization has declared objectives which are of course not just regional but global. So that should be a concern for everyone around. And Pakistan being the closest country, we are most vulnerable and exposed to IS. So I think while we can be comfortable with Fazlullah eliminated, I think the presence of IS should be of a source of concern to us all along.
That's a very good point, sir. And Qaisar, in your opinion, when we talk about IS, we also talk about the Afghan Taliban, and we consider the Afghan Taliban to be a potent force against IS. But there's also another fear that Afghan Taliban and organizations such as TTP and other fragmented organizations that are sympathetic to organizations such as Al-Qaeda and so forth may also join IS on the other hand. Do you think that that is something to be concerned about? Because it's either the Afghan Taliban also taking on the IS fighters, as they have, as we've seen them do in Afghanistan in certain cases. But the other option is also a possibility. What do you think about that?
Very true, very true. You see, when there is a new bully on the block, or when there is a new monster in the town, so the little and the fragmented actors, or the crime and the terror syndicates, within the proximity, they are always attracted by the power and the prestige of that organization, and we have seen this happening. It's just kind of a staircasing, that the organizations with that, which are losing momentum, they join a bigger organization just to retain their existence or trying to be relevant to be in the mainstream. So but at the same time, you see, to my modest understanding, this threat of IS can turn out to be a blessing in disguise, because it is considered to be a shared threat for all the regional actors. China, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Russia, all are agreed.
Central Asian states.
Central Asian states, all are convinced and agreed, and there is a mutuality of the interest, and it has already, it has a homogeneity. So this can bring countries onto a dialogue or the negotiation table, where they can reach onto some kind of consultative mechanism, where they can actually overpass and surpass their differences, and can come on to some kind of a jointly agreed or jointly workable modus operandi. So if this happens, this can be a very positive development for the region, because you see, as we see, IS and Daesh, primarily the ideology, this inspired, it's kind of a something which is unprecedented, or a threat which is unparalleled, and all the countries they are following, and I must credit Pakistan military for its operational preparedness, that we had, because we had always been very wary about this thing, that every time we let the monster becoming a leviathan, and then we tackled on. But in this case of IS and Daesh, we had taken some preemptive measures, and at the same time preventive measures. So to certain extent, we had been able to tackle on, by now we have been able to tackle on the menace of IS and Daesh. So we should also be banking on this idea of bringing region onto the same page, using this thing. And plus, this Mullah Fazlullah's death, I missed the point in the preceding conversation. Pakistan had been always lambasted by the United States and by the Afghan government, that Pakistan is harboring terrorists, and the terrorists which are attacking or assaulting Afghanistan. Perhaps this is the high time where we also need to clear it to the rest of the world, because you see, foreign policies, it does not exist primarily in black and white. There are very gray areas in the foreign policy. Perhaps we need to clear it to the rest of the countries and the stakeholders, that we are serious about tackling this issue. And all these initiatives, operational, the successes of Operation Zarb-e-Azab and Operation Raddul Fasad, and this recent killing of Mullah Fazlullah, all these things they vindicate, and all these things they substantiate and corroborate a point that Pakistan is really serious about thriving peace in the region, about having peace in the region. And somehow, and I agree to this argument, that the effective border management is the key to most of the consternation which we are facing right now.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for taking out the time and sharing your views with PTV World. Well, that's all the time we have for this program. But before we end the program, we always like to say that do draw your own conclusions from what you've heard. But as we leave you with this thought to ponder upon, the trauma that is being inflicted on children due to the US's ruthless immigration policy is having devastating effects on the physical and mental well-being of children and their parents. And it is inhumane to see what is happening in the US. And we hope that better sense prevails, and they cease and desist from this activity. On that hope and on that note, it's goodbye.